The discovery of insulin in 1922 is hailed as one of the most dramatic events in the history of medicine, which has changed the lives of diabetic patients forever. Insulin, the hormone which keeps blood glucose under control, is essential for life, and its deficiency leads to the dreaded disease called diabetes mellitus, with a lifelong need for medication to survive. Insulin is produced in our bodies from a single organ, specifically the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. Unfortunately, there is no other source in nature, which means if the pancreas stops working, high blood sugar is inevitable. Let's look through the eyes of the ancients and understand why insulin was so badly needed. The earliest description of diabetes appeared in Egypt, written around 1536 BCE in the Ebers Papyrus, which said it caused too much urination. From the 5th century BCE, diabetes mellitus and its attempted remedies were meticulously described in ancient India by Secretin and others, who observed that the urine gets sweet and ants are drawn to it. Diabetes was called madhumaya, or honey urine, and patients were noted to get intensely thirsty, lose their strength and eventually die. In Greece, Aretaeus of ancient Cappadocia introduced the term diabetes from the Greek word siphon. He believed that diabetes melted the flesh and siphoned it into urine. Later, Galen of Rome labeled diabetes as a disease of the kidneys, but unfortunately, Roman physicians tried to treat this by giving patients sweets and fruits, and obviously failed. Physicians like Zhongjing of China and Ibn Sina of Arabia observed the complications of diabetes like widespread boils and gangrene and documented them. But no one knew what caused the illness. Some believed it was a liver disease, and some even proposed that it was all due to drinking tea. So now we know that diabetes was a global phenomenon even in the past, and unfortunately, also a death sentence. Someone had to do something. From the 18th century, scientists began aggressive research to understand diabetes, meticulously documenting all their findings. Matthew Dobson and others finally demonstrated the presence of sugar in the urine and blood of diabetics. Claude Bernard showed that sugar existed in all the organs and in the blood of normal people too, but was raised only in diabetes. Thomas Willis took the opportunity to call diabetes the pissing evil, while William Cullen was more eloquent, coining the term diabetes mellitus, where mellitus means sweet. Now, high blood sugar had a formal name and a diagnostic kit, but there was still no effective treatment. Doctors tried starvation diets with strict fasting and calorie restriction, but this left patients malnourished and lifeless. Some physicians advised eating oats as part of an oat cure, and obese diabetics were told to lose weight through exercise. Despite all these efforts, the disease would inevitably progress to terrible complications like blindness, depression, incurable infections, gangrene, kidney failure, paralysis, and sudden deaths from heart attacks. In fact, a form of acute diabetes called the wasting disease, or type 1 or skinny diabetes, was particularly cruel. Most children with type 1 diabetes died within months after diagnosis. Before insulin was discovered, tens of thousands of deaths annually were attributed to diabetes in the USA alone. This grim reality set the stage for one of the most transformative medical discoveries in history: insulin. By the 19th century, Western medical scientists had demonstrated that the pancreas is essential for life, and that removing a dog's pancreas induced diabetes. But the pancreas produces many digestive substances, and finding out which one of these actually reduced blood sugar levels was incredibly difficult. Over the next few decades, many attempted to isolate the mysterious substance from the pancreas that controlled blood sugar, but failed. Some experiments resulted in toxic extracts. Others were unable to stabilize the compound. It was a hopeless effort and considered a waste of time. Now I must tell you about the unlikely band of doctors and their subjects without whom the search for insulin would have been lost. It was only because their destinies intertwined that the discovery of insulin was possible. First, let me introduce you to Frederick Banting. Born in 1891 in Ontario, Canada, and brought up on a farm, Banting was restless to prove himself to the world. His humble background made this hard, and even harder was his inability to decide what he wanted to do in life. He studied Christian theology, but left it midway and joined medical school. Then came World War I, where his service for the Army Medical Corps earned him a military cross from the British government. Little did he know that his toughest battles were yet to come. For the next few years, Banting tried many different things, switching from medicine to surgery, starting his private practice and even teaching young students. But he wasn't satisfied. He wanted to learn more. Banting's quest for knowledge made him join medical research as an assistant in animal experiments. This was precisely the turning point in his life. While preparing for a medical lecture, Banting came across an article by a scientist named Moses Barron, which pointed out that the pancreas probably has two different systems within it, one for routine digestion and one for controlling sugar. Banting wondered why anti-diabetic pancreatic extracts were not used to treat diabetes. Sounds simple enough, right? The problem was that the pancreas also produces powerful digestive enzymes that couldn't be separated from the anti-diabetic part, and injecting any one of these into a human being would cause terrible complications. He found out that at least 5 scientists had tried using pancreatic extracts in the past, but this resulted in catastrophic complications, and the experiments were halted. That night, Banting couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., he wrote a note to himself detailing the experiments he wanted to do. He was determined to find a solution. This brings us to Dr. John Macleod, our next hero, who was the head of physiology at the University of Toronto in Canada. He was an expert in animal experiments and had an advanced laboratory to study diseases, just what Banting needed. You see, although Banting was a brilliant man, he had been changing his field of expertise constantly. First it was medicine, then surgery, then teaching, and finally a leap into research. Not only was he very new to research, hadn't published anything, nor did he have an advanced degree. Therefore, he needed Macleod's help to put his plan into action. On November 7th, 1920, Banting approached Dr. Macleod with his theory. He believed that surgically blocking the secretion of all the digestive juices from the pancreas would preserve the anti-diabetic part, and that could be extracted and used as a medicine for diabetes. But Macleod knew about the failed experiments on pancreatic extraction and refused to help. Young Banting didn't give up. He approached Macleod repeatedly and finally convinced him to provide the laboratory facilities he needed. It was to be a collaboration between Macleod, Banting, and a student named Charles Best, who was an expert in blood sugar and animal testing. Best's role was of utmost importance. You see, up until now, diabetes was identified by testing sugar levels in the urine, which wasn't useful for short-term testing and quantitative experiments. But luck had it that this time, new blood sugar testing methods on small samples had been developed, which Charles Best had perfected. This made Banting's experiment much easier, doubling his enthusiasm, for he knew he had notched his first victory on the path to discovery. Now let me tell you more about Charles Best, the brilliant medical student who would help Banting and Macleod unravel the mysteries of insulin. Best was a research assistant in Macleod's lab and was about to leave for summer vacations when Macleod told him of this exciting research opportunity. Best and another student tossed a coin to decide who would stay, and fate had it that Best ended up joining the task. Charles Best would, under Macleod's guidance, do the hard work of preparing the test animals for surgery. He would perform chemical testing for sugar and help make the anti-diabetic pancreatic extracts. He had to coordinate everything with Banting, who was to be the chief surgeon. Can you imagine how destiny picks us for things we never thought can happen? What began as a summer research project for Banting, Best and Macleod eventually turned into one of the most exciting and controversial medical adventures of modern times. As for Charles Best, little did he know that a coin toss would change his life forever. Our next hero or heroes are of the furry kind. They are the countless lab animals who would endure great suffering and eventually give their lives for science. It's painful for me to tell this story, but history is not a bed of roses, and those who mattered most are often forgotten. These poor souls had to die as a planned part of the experiment to save humanity from diabetes. I will now proceed to tell you what happened in that lab. Banting and Best started work earnestly. They had received 10 test dogs from Macleod for experiments. As we already know, the key suspect in diabetes was a group of pancreatic cells in small islands within the pancreas, called the islets of Langerhans. The dogs were divided into 2 groups. The first group would be made diabetic by removal of their pancreas. The other group would undergo surgical blockage of the digestive part of the pancreas. After a few days, the digestive part would degenerate, so the surviving anti-diabetic part could be removed surgically. Then an extract would be prepared and purified. This crude extract would be injected into the diabetic dogs from Group 1 and their blood tested for a decrease in blood sugar. Banting and Best worked round the clock to get a working extract, but everything went wrong. The first dog who was injected died the next day, and whatever extracts they made after that were highly toxic and useless. The other dogs died prematurely due to the surgeries even before the extracts could be prepared. This was really bad, but the determined doctors decided to continue. They resorted to chasing down more dogs from the streets of Toronto for their experiments. It was embarrassing, heartless, and crazy. Now, the game was afoot. Banting started looking up older literature and came across a hormone called secretin. Secretin injections could theoretically remove all the digestive juices from the pancreas, leaving behind the anti-diabetic part. This might reduce the toxicity of his pancreatic extract. Armed with this new technique and keeping in mind Macleod's instructions, Banting and Best spent 3 grueling months trying to get a useful extract. And they succeeded. The happy pooches were finally surviving with injections of what Banting called islatin. Best confirmed that blood sugar readings declined every time an injection was given. This crude fluid was the first precursor of insulin, the wonder drug that saves lives. Banting was exuberant and wanted human trials of islatin to commence immediately. He pitched this idea to Macleod with great enthusiasm, only to be met with silence. Macleod was wise and experienced and knew that islatin was not yet fit for human use and likely to cause major reactions and even death if put into trials. Banting was upset and started behaving irrationally, suspecting that Macleod would steal his discovery. This paranoia led him to convince Charles Best to help him write their findings down and publish them, lest Macleod take the credit somehow. Being their first research paper, and with no prior experience or guidance, it turned out to be an absolute disaster. The poorly written descriptions failed to convince most doctors of their unusual discovery and highly complicated technique. To make matters worse, Banting arranged a live paper presentation to publicize his finding, but was left embarrassed on the presentation stage. He stammered and struggled to answer pointed questions from highly knowledgeable and experienced colleagues. Alas, all his determination and enthusiasm just could not make up for a lack of in-depth medical knowledge. Finally, John Macleod graciously stepped in and saved the presentation, wielding his experience and oratory skills to convince the world that they had cracked the code to treat diabetes. The professor even pitched for more funding to research a safer form of Insulin. Macleod was indeed a force to be reckoned with. Enter our final hero, James Collip. With some funding secured, the team hired James Collip in December 1921, an excellent biochemist who spent several weeks helping them purify insulin from cow pancreas using advanced techniques amid inputs from Macleod too. This purified liquid was tested on rabbits and found to be remarkably safe and effective. Now, it was finally time for human trials. Macleod used all his connections and clout with the Toronto General Hospital to convince them to start human trials. And as is true with all things new, they resisted as much as they could. After much persuasion, it was agreed on the single condition that Banting couldn't be a part of the trials because he was simply not qualified enough. As you can imagine, our short-tempered doctor was furious but kept quiet for the sake of science. The extract, temporarily called Macleod's serum, was given to Leonard Thompson, a 14-year-old boy dying from diabetes. Unfortunately, the very first dose caused a reaction, forming an abscess, and the hospital stopped the trial immediately. Banting was certain the hospital bungled something up and publicly blamed Macleod for everything. Macleod, though, knew time was running out and they needed to get another trial run or the project would lose funding. Everyone was on edge, so they came up with a new plan. Collip got to work first and started purifying the serum further, while the team approached a powerful organisation called the Connaught Laboratories. It took some convincing, but the Connaught group liked the idea and moved to pressure Toronto General Hospital for a second human trial. They succeeded. The second trial commenced on the 23rd of January 1922 on the same patient. The serum was now called insulin, and this time it was a runaway success. The boy recovered, became healthy, and had persistently controlled blood sugar. Finally, all their efforts had worked. Now lay ahead the enormous task of convincing the world that insulin works and that it can save thousands of lives. This time, Macleod compiled all their research and published it professionally, and it was appreciated by doctors' groups including the Association of American Physicians. It was also reported in newspapers. This was the dawn of a new era in diabetes treatment. The USA and Canada started exploring ways to mass-produce insulin through easier methods. After months of efforts and many failed attempts, a company called Eli Lilly began successful large-scale production of insulin from pig pancreatic extracts for the first time, making it easily available to doctors and hospitals. The introduction of insulin in hospitals revolutionized diabetes care. Mortality rates plummeted, and within a few years, diabetes was no longer a death sentence. Home injections of insulin gradually became commonplace, and life expectancy jumped. Over the next several years, the focus shifted from merely surviving with diabetes to preventing long-term complications such as kidney failure, blindness, and heart disease. Millions of diabetics now had better quality of life and overcame depression. But there was one problem. Animal-derived insulin frequently caused allergic reactions. This changed in 1955, when British scientist Frederick Sanger determined the molecular structure of insulin, paving the way for synthetic production. By the 1970s, advances in biotechnology enabled the production of recombinant human insulin using genetically modified bacteria, identical to that produced by the human pancreas. Today, insulin is mass-produced in highly sophisticated facilities using bacteria. It is purer than ever before and very safe to use. In fact, there are many types of synthetic insulins now, safer and better than the original, like rapid-acting, long-acting, weekly dosed, not to mention upcoming oral and inhalable insulins. Gadgets like insulin pens, pumps, and glucometers have made it very easy for anyone to use insulin safely and painlessly. Meanwhile, research continues to focus on finding a cure for diabetes. Stem cell therapies, islet transplantation, and artificial pancreas systems hold great promise for a future free from diabetes. But what happened of our heroes once insulin became a super hit? In 1923, Frederick Banting and John Macleod were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for their work on insulin. Banting, once a rough-mannered farm boy, remains the youngest recipient of the Nobel Prize in the category, being just 32 years old. Best and Collip also received portions of the prize money from Banting and Macleod. Although Charles Best did not win the prize, he went on to discover a life-saving blood thinner called heparin. Leonard Thompson, the boy who first received insulin, went on to live for 13 more years, a miracle for those times. The discovery of insulin was more than just a scientific breakthrough. It was a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. Just imagine how hard it once was to even get a single dose of insulin, something we so easily take for granted today. As we celebrate insulin's legacy, we are reminded of the countless lives it has touched and the hope it continues to inspire in those living with diabetes. The discovery of insulin, from a crude extract tested on dogs to a cornerstone of modern medicine, will forever be one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to watch a video on a specific topic, please mention it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.